Somewhere in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, there is an Amish garden bed that has not been tilled in over 40 years. No rototiller has ever touched it. No bottle of chemical herbicide has ever been opened near it. And yet, the soil is so dark and crumbly, it looks like fresh chocolate cake. The weeds? Almost non-existent. Meanwhile, 300 miles east, in suburbs and backyards across the country, millions of gardeners wake up every spring to the same heartbreak. The crabgrass is back. The thistles have returned. The dandelions have staged another invasion, despite all the spraying, all the pulling, all the money spent at the hardware store. Every beautiful spring morning that should bring joy brings another round of bending, kneeling, and aching. How many Saturday mornings have been lost to the same losing battle? The global herbicide market now exceeds $34 billion a year, growing by roughly 5% annually. That is not a coincidence. That is a business model. One built not on solving the weed problem permanently, but on managing it just enough to keep gardeners reaching for the same bottles season after season. But in Amish country, tens of thousands of gardeners have quietly stepped off that treadmill. They grow abundant food, year after year, without spending a dime on commercial weed killers. Their secret is not exotic. It is not expensive. It is a system so simple that the modern gardening industry has very little financial reason to promote it. They call it the no-till forever method. And the science now backing it up comes from some of the most respected agricultural universities in the world. Here is exactly how it works, and how any backyard gardener can start using it this season. 1. The Great Tilling Deception and the Hidden Weed Seed Bank. Every spring, the same ritual plays out in backyards everywhere. The rototiller comes out of the shed. The engine sputters to life. The soil gets churned until it looks dark, fluffy, and clean. The gardener stands back, wipes the sweat away, and admires the empty bed. It looks like the perfect, fresh start. But appearances in this case are dangerously deceiving. That freshly tilled bed is actually the single biggest reason the weeds keep winning. And it is a mistake that even experienced gardeners, people who have been growing food for 30 or 40 years, make without ever questioning it. Research from Michigan State University uncovered a reality hiding beneath every garden in America. Agricultural soils contain anywhere from 56 to nearly 15,000 viable weed seeds in just a single square foot. 15,000. Picture a patch of dirt no larger than a dinner plate, and imagine 15,000 tiny seeds packed into it, all waiting. Scientists call this underground reservoir the weed seed bank, and these seeds are astonishingly patient. A single common lamb's quarters plant, one of the most familiar garden weeds in North America, can produce over 72,000 seeds in a single season. Many of those seeds remain viable underground for 5, 10, even 20 years. Velvet leaf seeds have been documented germinating after decades of dormancy in total darkness. All those buried seeds need are two things: a bit of moisture and one brief flash of sunlight. Every time a tiller blade or a shovel edge slices through the ground, it reaches into that dark underground vault, scoops seeds up to the surface, and hands them exactly what they have been patiently waiting for. It is like reaching into a bag of 10,000 lottery tickets and pulling out a handful. Except the gardener is the one who always loses. But the damage does not stop at weed seeds. Soil biologist Dr. Elaine Ingham spent years mapping what she calls the soil food web, a vast living network of bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and microorganisms that keeps healthy soil functioning. Picture it as an underground city with roads, delivery routes, and communication lines all running between plant roots. When a tiller rips through that city, it levels the buildings and tears up the roads. The most critical casualties are the fungal highways known as arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. These microscopic networks attach directly to plant roots, and help them access water and minerals from deep underground, far deeper than roots alone could ever reach. Think of them as the plumbing system of the soil. Destroy the plumbing, and the plants go thirsty even when water is nearby. These same fungi produce a natural biological adhesive called glomalin, which binds soil particles together into spongy, aerated clumps that hold both air and water. Destroy the fungi, destroy the glomalin. By midsummer, the garden bed that looked so promising in April has baked into rock-hard clay that cracks in the heat and sheds water like concrete. The Amish approach starts with one radical decision: retire the tiller. Permanently. Let the buried seeds stay buried in the dark where they cannot germinate. Let the fungal networks rebuild and reconnect. Let the soil do what healthy soil was always designed to do, when gardeners simply stop tearing it apart every spring. But if the tiller is retired, how does a new bed actually get started? How do existing weeds get managed without chemicals, without machinery, and without back-breaking labor? That answer involves something most households throw into the recycling bin every single week. 2. The cardboard revolution, rebuilding the forest floor. Walk into any undisturbed forest and look down at the ground. It is never bare. Fallen leaves, decaying twigs, bark fragments, and plant debris form a continuous blanket over the soil surface. That blanket does three essential things at once. It smothers weed seedlings before they get started, it feeds the microorganisms underneath, and it traps moisture so the soil never fully dries out. Nature perfected this system long before gardening existed. The Amish simply copy it, using plain, brown, corrugated cardboard. Here is the step-by-step process, and it is almost shockingly simple. First, there is no need to break your back pulling existing weeds or ripping out grass. Just mow or cut the vegetation as low to the ground as possible. Then, water the area thoroughly. This is not just for moisture. It wakes up the soil biology underneath and signals to earthworms that something interesting is about to happen on the surface. Next, lay down overlapping sheets of plain brown corrugated cardboard. Remove any tape, stickers, or glossy printed sections first. Now here is the detail that separates success from frustration. The edges of each piece must overlap by at least 4 to 6 inches. Weeds are relentless opportunists. If there is even a hairline gap between two sheets where light sneaks through, they will find it and push through within days. Why cardboard instead of the plastic landscape fabric sold at every garden center? Because cardboard does two things that plastic never can. First, it is completely opaque. It blocks 100% of the sunlight reaching the soil, instantly shutting down the weed seed bank below the surface. Without that trigger of light, existing weeds die in darkness, and those 15,000 buried seeds stay dormant. Second, and this is what makes researchers so enthusiastic, as the cardboard sits in the dark and damp, it becomes an irresistible food source for earthworms. The decaying cellulose draws them up to the surface like a dinner bell. They tunnel through compacted soil, aerating it for free, and leave behind worm castings, widely recognized as one of the most nutrient-dense natural fertilizers available. Over 4 to 6 months, the cardboard biodegrades completely, disappearing into the earth right when it is no longer needed. Plastic landscape fabric, by contrast, stays forever, slowly suffocating the soil biology beneath it and eventually tearing into ragged strips that have to be pulled out by hand. To complete the system, the cardboard gets covered with organic layers. The Amish typically add 2 to 4 inches of nitrogen-rich compost, followed by a protective top layer of carbon-rich mulch, straw, shredded autumn leaves, or wood chips. Soil scientist Dr. Christine Jones has shown that this kind of diverse, multi-layered organic covering protects soil biology through drought and heavy rain alike, creating a resilience that bare or chemically treated soils simply cannot match. And here is the part that surprises most people. Planting does not have to wait months for the cardboard to break down. Transplants can go in the very same day. Just cut a small X in the cardboard with a utility knife, peel back the flaps, set the transplant into the soil below, and fold the cardboard snugly back around the stem. The result is striking. Vigorous, early growth and a dramatic reduction in weeds from day one. The cardboard method handles the weed problem from the top down. But what about unlocking the full growing potential of each individual plant? That requires a closer look at what happens inside the planting hole, and a mistake that even seasoned gardeners make without realizing it. 3. The planting hole hack for unstoppable growth. There is a frustrating plateau that many dedicated gardeners hit and never quite understand. The watering is consistent. The compost is generous. The plants look decent enough, but they refuse to truly take off. They just sit there, stuck in neutral, season after season. The leaves are pale instead of deep green. The fruit is small and scarce. Often the culprit is completely invisible. The nutrients are physically present in the soil, but they are chemically locked up and inaccessible because the pH is out of balance. Think of it like a pantry full of food with every cabinet padlocked shut. The groceries are right there. The plants simply cannot reach them. Many traditional Amish growers solve this with a clever pairing of two items that cost nothing: spent coffee grounds and wood ash. But there is a critical catch that trips up nearly everyone who tries it without understanding the chemistry. Used incorrectly, these two ingredients do more harm than good. Coffee grounds are a genuinely useful soil amendment. They provide nitrogen, they attract earthworms, and they stimulate microbial activity. However, with repeated heavy use over time, coffee grounds can gradually nudge the soil pH downward in the acidic direction. That slow drift begins to lock up essential nutrients, particularly calcium and phosphorus, that plants are struggling to absorb. The traditional counterbalance comes from the fireplace: wood ash. Specifically, ash from clean, untreated hardwood. Never ash from charcoal briquettes, painted wood, or pressure-treated lumber. Those contain chemicals that have no place near a food garden. Pure hardwood ash is a concentrated source of potassium, calcium, and magnesium, the exact minerals that tomatoes and peppers need to build strong cell walls and produce heavy, flavorful fruit. Now here is where most well-meaning gardeners go wrong. The obvious instinct is to toss a scoop of dry wood ash directly into the planting hole alongside the coffee grounds. But wood ash is highly alkaline. When dry ash meets the nitrogen in coffee grounds, a reaction kicks off. The alkalinity causes the precious nitrogen to convert into ammonia gas and escape into the air before the plant can use any of it. On top of that, the sudden localized pH spike can scorch tender young roots. The workaround passed down through traditional practice is simple and elegant. Instead of using dry ash, the ash gets turned into a gentle liquid extract. Just 2 tablespoons of hardwood ash stirred into a liter of water and left to sit overnight. By morning, the minerals have dissolved into a cloudy, milky liquid, still potent, but safely diluted. At planting time, a generous handful of spent coffee grounds goes loosely into the bottom of the hole. Then, just a 1/4 cup of the milky ash extract gets poured gently over the grounds. The chemistry that follows is quiet, but powerful. The dissolved alkaline minerals neutralize the acidity of the coffee gradually and evenly, without any destructive spike. The pH settles into that sweet spot where nutrients unlock and become available. When a transplant goes into that prepared hole, its roots immediately enter a biologically active, pH-balanced pocket of soil. The nitrogen from the coffee is available right away. The calcium from the ash begins building stronger stems. Gardeners who use this method consistently report noticeably deeper green foliage and more vigorous growth by the 3rd week, a visible difference compared to plants set in untreated holes just a few feet away. Dr. Jerry Hatfield, former director of the USDA's National Laboratory for Agriculture and the Environment, spent decades researching how soil chemistry affects plant performance. His work confirmed what traditional growers have always understood intuitively. When the soil chemistry is properly balanced, the plant's own immune system functions at its peak, resisting pests and diseases far more effectively than any chemical spray can manage from the outside. This planting hole technique takes 5 minutes, costs nothing, and gives every transplant the strongest possible start. But what about the long months between growing seasons, when the garden sits empty and exposed? That is when the Amish turn to a remarkable plant that fights weeds entirely on its own. 4. Nature's chemical warfare, the miracle of cereal rye. Here is a fact that sounds almost too good to be real. There is a common, inexpensive grain crop that manufactures its own natural herbicide while it grows. It suppresses weeds automatically. No spraying, no pulling, no effort from the gardener at all. At the end of the summer harvest, experienced Amish growers never leave their soil bare and exposed. Bare soil is an open invitation. Nature rushes to cover any exposed ground with whatever grows fastest, and in most gardens, that means weeds. So instead of leaving beds empty through the cold months, traditional growers scatter seed for a specific cover crop called cereal rye. Researchers at Cornell University and Penn State University have extensively documented a biological phenomenon called allelopathy. As cereal rye grows, even through freezing winter temperatures, it quietly produces chemical compounds called benzoxazenones in its roots and leaves. When the rye residue begins to decompose in early spring, those compounds release directly into the surrounding soil. The effect on weeds is devastating. University studies show that cereal rye residue can suppress the germination of notorious garden invaders like pigweed, crabgrass, and lamb's quarters by up to 95% for 30 to 60 days. That is near total weed suppression, achieved entirely through the plant's own natural chemistry, without a single application of anything from a bottle. The spring management is just as simple. About 3 to 4 weeks before planting time, the rye gets cut at the base, right at ground level, and left lying flat on the soil surface like a thick golden blanket. No tilling. The fungal networks below stay intact. That mat of rye residue now does triple duty. It physically blocks sunlight from reaching weed seeds. It conserves up to 30% of the soil's moisture through evaporation reduction, and it continues releasing its natural weed-suppressing chemistry as it slowly breaks down. Spring transplants go right through it, pushed through small openings cut in the mat. For home gardeners, cereal rye seed is widely available at farm supply stores and online seed retailers, often sold in bulk by the pound for just a few dollars. A light scattering across the bed in early to mid-fall, ideally 4 to 6 weeks before the first hard frost, is all it takes. The rye sprouts quickly, grows through winter without any watering or care, suppresses weeds through spring, and feeds the soil as it decomposes. One simple fall planting replaces months of weeding the following year. Cereal rye handles the big picture beautifully. But what about the thousands of tiny weed seeds still lurking right on the soil surface, waiting for their chance? For those, the Amish have one more trick, and it is almost deviously clever. 5. The stale seedbed and the nocturnal army. Growing delicate crops from seed, carrots, beets, lettuce, radishes, beans, presents a unique challenge. These plants are tiny and fragile in their early days, far too small to compete with weeds. Every weed seedling that sprouts alongside them is stealing light, water, and nutrients. The Amish answer is a strategy called the stale seedbed, and it works exactly like a carefully laid trap. The garden bed gets prepared just as if planting day had arrived, raked smooth, watered deeply, the surface looking perfect and ready. And then, nothing happens. No seeds go in. The gardener walks away and simply waits. Within a week to 10 days, something predictable occurs. Thousands of dormant weed seeds resting near the surface sense the moisture and the light. They sprout eagerly, tiny green threads pushing up through the soil, confident their moment has finally arrived. And that is when the trap snaps shut. Just as those weed seedlings emerge, barely visible, no more than a fraction of an inch tall, with almost no root system yet, a sharp hoe lightly scrapes across the top half-inch of soil. 5 minutes of gentle, shallow work wipes out an entire generation of weeds before a single one can grow large enough to drop seed of its own. The timing matters. Catch them while they are thread-thin and barely rooted, and they come out with almost no effort. Wait a week too long, and they dig in. The key is also to scrape shallowly. Going too deep just brings up more buried seeds from below and starts the whole cycle over again. Repeating this simple process twice before planting can permanently reduce weed emergence in that bed by 50 to 70% for the rest of the growing season. The weeds were invited to the party, and the door got locked behind them. For the open spaces between tall crops like corn, tomatoes, and pole beans, the Amish use another layer of defense, a living ground cover. The most common choice is white Dutch clover, sown directly between rows once the main crops are a few inches tall and established enough not to be crowded out. This low-growing clover delivers 3 benefits at once. It forms a dense living carpet that physically crowds out weeds, leaving no bare soil for opportunists to colonize. It pulls free nitrogen straight from the atmosphere through a symbiotic relationship with bacteria in its root nodules, delivering that nitrogen directly into the surrounding soil, feeding neighboring crops without a single bag of fertilizer. And its clusters of delicate white blossoms attract pollinating insects by the hundreds throughout the growing season, dramatically increasing fruit set on nearby tomatoes, squash, and peppers. But perhaps the most fascinating benefit happens after dark. A study published by researchers at Cornell University found that common ground beetles, small, hard-shelled nocturnal predators that thrive in the shelter of cover crops and straw mulch, emerge at night and consume up to 65% of weed seeds resting on the soil surface. While the gardener sleeps, a quiet army of allies is patrolling the garden rows and eating the next generation of weeds before they ever get a chance to germinate. Between the stale seedbed trap, the living clover carpet, and the nocturnal beetle patrol, even the most vulnerable seed-started crops get a real fighting chance, without chemicals, without endless hand-weeding, and without waking up sore the next morning. There is something quietly powerful about stepping back and seeing all of this together. When the tiller gets retired and the cardboard goes down, when coffee grounds and wood ash replace store-bought products, when cereal rye and clover and earthworms and ground beetles are allowed to do the work they were always designed to do, gardening stops being a battle. It becomes something closer to a partnership. A conversation between the gardener and the ground where both sides finally understand each other. The Amish understood this for generations. They watched. They listened to the soil instead of fighting it. And now, modern science is confirming their wisdom with hard data from respected universities. Abandoning the plow, covering the soil, feeding the biology instead of poisoning it, these are not shortcuts or compromises. They are simply the way healthy soil was meant to work all along. Every technique in this video shares one thing in common. It works with nature instead of against it. And every single one is free. No special equipment, no annual subscriptions to the chemical aisle at the hardware store, just observation, patience, and a willingness to let the soil do what it already knows how to do. It costs nothing. It saves aching backs and stiff knees, and it builds rich, dark, living soil that will outlast every gardener who tends it, a quiet legacy passed down not in dollars, but in the dirt itself. If this changed the way you think about your garden, share it with a friend who might be ready to put down the sprayer and pick up the cardboard. And leave a comment below. Are you retiring your tiller this spring? Thank you for spending this time with Rooted Grace.